Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here on the MJSA podcast. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
I wanted to start with the conversation just with a little about your background and your sort of youth and education, how you kind of got into the business that you're in now. You grew up in Illinois.
Right.
How exactly? What was it that led you into the dazzling world of diamonds and jewelry, and what led you at that point into cutting and where you are now?
Well, like you said, I grew up in East Central Illinois, actually, the University of Illinois. My dad was a professor in mining and metallurgy, and I would say I think I was about 19 years old, and he went on sabbatical to Holland, which is where my folks were from, and I went to go visit him in the summertime, and I was a hippie, kind of still am, but whatever. And looking for something to do. I was going to college, but I was looking for something different than that. And my mom actually had an uncle and a cousin who were diamond setters, and so I thought maybe I'd learn to apprentice over there and stay over there. War in Vietnam was going on. Anyway, long story short, on my way home, the guy I wanted to apprentice with, he said, "No, not interested, because you don't want to do this. This is dying trade, and I've got good contacts because of my dad, but no, go back to school and get a degree in psychology."
Right.
And so I was a little discouraged, but anyway, on the way home, I stopped in London and went to the Tower of London, and I saw the crown jewels, and I, in particular, saw the Cullinan. And when I saw the Cullinan, I was just in awe, and I thought, what an amazing thing. I had worked as a sculptor's apprentice, and I thought, sculpting diamond, wow, that would be even better than setting them, just actually cutting them from the raw material and turning them into something beautiful. And so the whole flight home, I was thinking about that. And then I went to the University Library, University of Illinois, which is one of the biggest libraries in the world, and checked out all the books I could on diamonds and trying to find more information about diamond cutting. And of course, there wasn't any. There was a chapter here and there talked about the tools, but that was it. No how to, no nothing.
Right.
It was all father to son. So I started looking around. I went to New York, and they said, "Nah, it's the Diamond Cutters Guild." Basically slammed the door in my face. And so I started looking for schools around the world, couldn't find any, and translated my search into Dutch, and we sent a letter to the Belgian consulate, and they said, there's a school in the United States. And I said, there is. And I had seen a reference to a guy in the back of Lapidary Journal in one of those 1-inch columns.
Sure.
I said, learn how to cut diamonds in your spare time, maybe ooh, cash, and so, but I figured that was a scam, and it turns out that was a school in Gardnerville, Nevada, American School of Diamond Cutting, and it was run by Leonard Udell, who was a 4th-generation diamond cutter from New York, but he left New York right around the time of World War II and went to LA to cut diamonds, and was really the pioneer there, and wound up cutting a lot of industrial during the war because all the diamond cutters were sort of engaged in diamond tools rather than gems during the war. And when he retired, he decided he tried to train his son, wasn't interested, train some people, and then they would leave. So he thought, well, I'll start a school and teach young people who come from outside the trade, who will have some passion, because this father to son thing, over time you lose passion. And I want to put some more passion in the trade. He was pretty roundly ostracized. Eventually he wrote a book out of Diamond Cutter's Handbook, which was the first book in English published in 1985 on how to cut a diamond.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
So I did that. I became sort of his right-hand guy because I was Dutch, and he was of Dutch heritage. So we kind of bonded on that, and I became his apprentice. Eventually took over his school and brought it back to Illinois and ran it there for 5 years, American School of Diamond Cutting. And, my base was really Central Illinois, which is not the hub of diamond cutting in the world. I would call for equipment in New York, and they go, "You cut diamonds out there?"
Right.
And so, in fact, everywhere I've ever lived, generally speaking, the people in the local community don't use my service because the jewelers are afraid that somebody's going to find out somebody knows more about diamonds than they do. So I
Right.
get all of my stuff from around the country. From people.
Sure.
So that's how I got into it. And I got to say, it's been an interesting career since I started. I started 50 years ago, 1972, and the trade in the United States was really booming in New York around that time, and it just went on a steady decline, and it's pretty morbid today. It doesn't really, in the United States, manufacturing diamonds doesn't exist. Cutting mostly is people like myself who do recuts. Some of the shops are a little bit bigger than one-man shops, maybe 4 or 5 guys, but that's it. And even that is declining because old mines, which was really the bulk of our trade, they're now trading for the same prices as triple X's. I mean, it's nuts.
Right.
Nobody wants to recut anything. They want to tweak it a little bit, $100 here and there. But it's really a declining industry in the United States.
But as you were saying, that much of what you're doing now, and I know that you've, as you commonly say, you're an artisanal cutter. A lot of what you're doing is recuts, and some of that has to do, as I understand it, as you've said, with the fact that you don't really have access to the type. You don't have access to the supply of rough diamonds and stones and things like that.
It's a weird spot for a craftsman to be. I mean, if you're a potter, you can get clay. If you're a wood. If you're a diamond cutter by yourself, you can't get diamond. I mean, for all practical purposes. De Beers has these, $5-10 million sites every 10 weeks. It's like, no way.
Yeah.
You can buy that. And if you're buying from them, those site buyers are also the people that have mass manufacturing plants around the world for cheap. So you're competitive with that. I do some of my own design and my own cut, which is interesting. But I don't get a chance to get at that very often. So, it's interesting.
But, yeah, and it's interesting. And it sounds like, and it makes sense knowing what I know about you in terms of like you said, your initial interest in it and seeing, seeing the crown jewels and sort of that you went at it from the beginning. It drew you in because of the design aspect, because of the artistic aspect of it. It sounds like, which makes a lot of sense, which is interesting.
Yeah, I styled myself as it kind of actually used to exist like that in Antwerp, in the Kempen, they called it. It was sort of, the cutters lived in the countryside and they schlepped their stuff into the city, and they would have these victory garden, small little 2-3 acre farms, and they'd have a cutting shop in the back. And I like that idea, so that sort of was my vision, my whole life. Trust me, that's not where I made money or my reputation.
Obviously, one of the things that we have covered, that MJSA has covered in the last few years, and something that's dominated a lot of the conversation has been the situation between lab-grown diamonds versus natural diamonds. And I think in the last several years, too, the questions come up where it's been sort of what the next big thing is, or what the next sort of disruption, or what the next change is going to be in the industry in terms of diamonds and things like that. And one of the things that in a previous conversation that you and I had started to talk about that you mentioned was this idea and this technology that's come on board recently of the idea of fully automatic cutting. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what that is and what that potentially means?
Going forward? Yeah. I mean, the Israelis developed so-called automatic cutting quite a few years ago. They basically went to De Beers and said, "You've got all these bucketfuls of little tiny stones, and De Beers gave some of those to the Indian marketplace because of cheap labor, and at the same time, the Israelis got their hands on them too. And it was essentially the stuff they didn't use it, and so interestingly enough, they went head to head, and the Israelis could cut very regular diamonds, so with very regular grain structure. Computerization was easy enough to do that. So they've been cutting automatically everything but the stars on a round brilliant for years, 25, 30 years. And the Indians had, of course, as the sort of caste system goes, they had all the uncuttables, so that because they had cheap labor and they could sit there and work it for a while.
Sure.
But now what's happened is that's sort of a very primitive sort of automation. So what you have in every other industry is a CAD to CNC machining that is extremely accurate, and you can do all kinds of designs. You don't have to tool up for different designs. Your tool will handle any design. So that has spurred a development by the Swiss, a machine called the Da Vinci machine, which does water laser jet cutting, and it cuts all 57 facets on it. Heck, any number of facets. I mean, you can take any CAD design you have,
Wow.
put it into the machine, plan your stone out, put it into the machine, and the machine will cut it on the right angles, on the right azimuth, on the right everything, right shape, all of it, except the final polish. And so that it's got sort of a graphitized finish on each facet. So you have to catch each one of those flat for a second and polish it just briefly. But that's some of the hardest work there is in diamond cutting. Is all the meat points and all that
Right.
final accuracy. And to get somebody to do that all day long and nothing but that is, it's tough. And so they're working on developing a way to do that final polish, which, and this is I helped install the first Da Vinci machine, commercial one, up in, I didn't so much install the machine as install the final polish process up in Yellowknife, Diamonds to Canada.
Right.
And that now is going to probably spread elsewhere. And so it can be used in situ, like in Angola. I think they're planning one. Botswana might be, so these machines are pretty expensive. I mean, you got to pony up $1 million plus to use one machine. So that probably will come down. There are some other ones similar that do 8 square. So, but the ability, what's nice about that, I mean, the future, there's all kinds of possibilities. It's a really rich time in the business. You have modeling programs where you can make CAD designs on all kinds of things. You have machines like this that can make them without having to retool your whole shop with all these hand tools and everything. So that's interesting. And what's really interesting from a retailer's point of view, I think, is that retailers struggle with diamonds and have for a long time because they tend to sell them as a commodity. And to get a good profit, you kind of have to have a story like a branded diamond. And there's, everybody can't have, I got the best round brilliant as the brand. So these storied diamonds, the boutique diamonds and boutique production even. So if I'm a jeweler and I've got a design that I want to sell to my audience that nobody else has, the machinery will enable that a lot more so than the factory, pushing it all out and having to bankroll it and wait for orders to come in. They can make it, just in time, just like the Japanese just in time technology. So that is exciting. Now, telling stories is a whole other thing. It's like I can tell stories all day long. The question is there a story that appeals to the customer?
Right. Something that's going to grab them.
Yeah, that they can tell that is meaningful to them, other than, oh, this bicycle has more spokes on its wheels. Still a round wheel, So anyway, my own cutting, I've developed a cut based on the old Jubilee cut, the 20th century cut they call it. It has no table. It comes to a peak like a rose cut on top, and it has a brilliant bottom. That has its own problems because there's no machinery for that. All the machinery in the industry, all the measurement equipment, all the cutting equipment is all based on having a flat table. If you don't have a flat table,
it's a non-starter. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, there's opportunities like that out there. I think really interesting. And I think more and more jewelers, oddly enough, they're asking me for it now when I'm feeling like, I don't want more work. I want better work. And I want, more free time and more money. So anyway.
But then I think that, I think that's, brings us into the other part of the conversation, which is when it comes to, you developing something like that and working on something like that, what role does kind of this stuff like technology and sort of new tools play into your process of your life and your work right now? You obviously have a very solid foundation in doing things the way you learned them in the old ways, and you're looking at things from a creative design sort of perspective. How does that all factor together for you?
Well, I mean, like those designs, that was an extremely slow process for me for many years and the reason the diamond industry is so conservative is because diamonds are expensive and
Right.
you don't want to be messing around, a little half carat diamond, you blow that, it's $1,500 out there.
Yeah.
It's quartz, it's 15 cents, who cares? So,
Right.
but what's really changed now is you can model the ideas you have and you can do all the ray tracing and testing for performance and all of that before you even touch a diamond. And to be honest, when I went and did work in the lab grown business for a year, I was able to really tweak a couple of the models that I had because the material was inexpensive enough and the owners were innovative enough to want to try some new designs. So
Right.
that helped, so every little bit helps, but it's still, people, well, can you send me a bunch of them? Can I pick them? And it's like, no, I'm not a millionaire.
Right.
I can't do that. So,
Right. It comes back to that supply issue of,
So what I did for a long time was, you want one? Tell you what, every one I've ever cut sold. So there's that. And then you can also take an old mine or an old European of a certain style and make it efficiently. So if you buy that, I'll cut it for you. I charge you for the cutting, and then you own it. And then you're not so, you're not so likely to complain about what it doesn't do.
Or just,
You're going to figure out what it does do and go sell it. And once you do that, you'll buy another one. So
yeah, makes sense.
Organic growth, yeah.
I wanted to spend a little time talking about one of sort of your kind of current and kind of key initiatives that you have that's aimed a little bit at doing a bunch of things. I mean, passing down the knowledge that you're talking about, and looking toward the future, educating the sort of next generation of people. But it involves more than just your teaching just basic cutting skills, which that's something that you've started to do and want to do. But and it's a little bit beyond just the financial support too, but it's kind of a boots on the ground approach that you were talking about that we discussed earlier, and kind of a holistic one. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been working on in Sierra Leone and what that project is about?
Yeah. So real briefly, my background goes from the wheel, which I consider the first transformative process in the supply chain. And then my own personality took it to wholesale. I did branding. I was with Hearts on Fire for many, many years, and into other things. A buddy of mine who went to school with me, he went the other direction. He went to Sierra Leone. He went to the mines. He went to go dig in the earth and pull them out himself and export them and cut them in the United States, all of that kind of stuff. And the two of us have been working on a project to teach artisanal mining in artisanal cutting in the artisanal mining areas so that they can start to get value added. So there's a bunch of stories in the diamond business that are sort of our Achilles heel. One of them is the past and the colonial extraction of diamonds and paying people minimal amount of money and taking it out of the country and processing it.
Right.
And typical colonial model. And then the next step was the same thing happening after they left. The governments did the same, kleptocracies did the same thing. So you have that. The artisanal miners represent about 10 million people that are affected by the diamond trade who are pretty well immiserated to this day. And so what do we do with it? What do we do with that? How do we those diamonds aren't all that important, maybe 10, 15% of the worldwide production, but they're important enough. And it is a black mark, so how do you address that? So there's a bunch of issues going on. And what we decided was the first step is to ask, what people want in those areas. And what they want is, they don't want to mine, they want to do something else. They want diversity. And so you can't pay more for diamonds than the going rate. So what else can you do? Diversify your economy based on these diamonds, which is what all the other economies do. They use industrial diamonds. Gem diamonds creates entrepreneurs, wholesale, retail, designers, jewelry manufacturing, all that kind of stuff in country that has, diamonds. Not the country that produces them, but the diamonds that have acquired them. So how do you get that happening on a more local level? And how do you turn that into a story that sells that diamond? So we have things like blockchain. We have things, we can document a diamond from the miner all the way, our tagline is from mine to yours. And so the entire supply chain has been documented. And it becomes a story. It was first aimed to attract the African diaspora. So African Americans, Africans in London, Africans in Paris, wealthy Africans who buy diamonds. And hey, maybe part of buying that diamond can help Africa and go back and recycle a little bit and jazz the economy, the local economy. So we've been working with a guy who's getting his PhD from Carnegie Mellon. His family won the lottery. His name's Fas Levy. His family won the lottery during the Civil War in Sierra Leone to come to the United States to get a visa. So he grew up in the United States after the age of 10. And he's extremely accomplished. Master's from Parsons School of Design, PhD from Carnegie Mellon, and he wants to give back. And his case study is Sierra Leone. And what we want to do is teach diamond cutting. We want to teach computer coding, strategic design and management, jewelry design, all the things that you could enable with some of the local product that you got. And the youth is much more educated than it used to be, but it's not educated enough. And specifically in these extractive industries and communities based on that.
Right.
Those extractive industries are going to be gone at some point. So how do you do that? So it's a big project. It's actually what I got my master's degree in 25 years ago. I recommended that for Botswana way back.
Oh, yeah.
And they call it beneficiation today. So, I feel like the curse of being ahead of your time is nobody's listening. And 25 years later, when it's happening,
it comes around. Right. But I think that's the really interesting thing about it is that as you were saying, that it's not just about, you're not just either pumping money into it or something. It's really about setting them up for the eventual situation that's going to arise, which is that the industry itself is going to eventually be less of an option. It's not going to exist forever. And so it's about putting more of those types of things in place, which I think is really fascinating. So, and important. And there's a way to really, I think you said it, empower them as well, to take that part of the future on eventually down the road.
See where they head with it. What designs do they come up with? What do they want to do? It's really more about them than it is us. And again, so right now the market for that we've found that's open to it is a whole group of ethical jewelers who sell fair trade gold and fair mine diamond,
sure,
colored gemstones, and some of these projects have been doing pretty well. And so that is another undercurrent in our industry is we're sensing that the millennials they don't just want gold, they want to know that it's done properly, that it's not poisoning the rivers, and all of that. And so they want to put their money in places that they think will actually do good the most. And so there are markets for it. And, how much more does it cost? That's always, how much more is it going to be in it? And my take is always like, it's not more. It is a different standard. It is a standard, and it is what it is. That's what it costs. It doesn't cost more. Nobody else is doing the same thing for less.
Right. And it has part, the story is almost built into a lot of this too, that connection that people want to have to something that's, I don't just have one of a million, stones. I have some connection to something bigger. I have some connection.
It's like, that becomes like toast after a while. It's like, do you want something special? Well, what makes it special? Why is it special to me? Why is this particular one special? And that's the heart of the business. And,
sure.
I think it's really interesting. I'm nervous about the future because I think that all the controversy around lab grown is yet to be played out. There is I mean, they've been making them for 50 years. Since they started making them, the price has been going down, 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 down.
Right.
Over time. Natural diamonds, De Beers for what they were worth, up and up and up and up. Now, De Beers quit advertising 20 years ago. So you have a whole generation that doesn't really know, except for legacy, what De Beers is
That's a
about.
good point.
They
Yeah.
think De Beers is still a monopoly.
Yeah.
That's 20 years ago. They
Yeah.
think there's still a war in Sierra Leone. That's 20 years ago. So there's an enormous amount of education that should be done that isn't being done. A lot of sales are based on just that. What do I got to say to sell this stone today? So
Right.
the long term is, I don't know. I mean, I would love to think it's really promising because of all the things that can be promising, but I'm afraid that consumer confidence might get eroded at some point to the point where they just look the other way, like in the fur industry. And so we'll see.
Right.
I'm
Right. And
confident, but
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good start. It's a challenge. Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. What is there anything else that you're looking, that you see down the road that you're excited about? That's exciting. That's something that you're. This is obviously a big, a big project. I know you've talked about trying to do some more teaching and things like that. But what else? Is there anything else that stands out?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the one last thing. I mean, on a more personal note, when I worked for Hearts on Fire, we created a thing called the Diamond Wizard on their website where consumers could ask any question they wanted about diamonds and it would be answered. It didn't have to be about Hearts on Fire. And I was the guy that answered all those questions. So that went on my business card. I was the Diamond Wizard. They own the trademark. And well, now I do. I just got it about a month ago, the registered trademark. They let it lapse for various reasons, whatever. And what my intention is to start doing some diamond cutting training in a more modern way. So YouTube videos for free for starters, and then maybe Zoom consultation as people get more interested. If they don't, they just drop off and the information they have is enough to go sell more or know more about taking in recuts or whatever. And then write a simple book around that. And then I really would like to write, Al Gilbertson wrote a beautiful book about the first 50 years of the ideal cut in America. And I want to do the next 50 years, which is about from when I started in business to today.
Yeah.
And because I've been involved with most of it, with the branding, with the cut grading, with the performance, light performance grading, all of that stuff. I was very integrally involved with all of that. So I'm kind of an outsider because my family wasn't in the business, but I've been in the business for 50 years and I'm a very avid learner. And so I know a lot about the inside work, what things actually mean. And I feel like consumers, by and large, don't have a lot of the insights that they need. So I want to make that available, sort of confessions of the diamond. So that's my own personal project.
Yeah,
I got my plate full.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to that. I think that we'll have you back on. We can talk about that when the time comes. But really, thank you so much for talking about all this. I think I have a lot of good stuff here.
Cool. Thank you very much.